welcome to Planet America. I'm John Barron.
I'm Licciardello, and we've got a situation.
There is major breaking news in the Jeffrey Epstein case.
The Justice Department has just released transcripts and audio from Epstein co-conspirator Ghislaine Maxwell.
Today's release came without any warning.
Has Maxwell provided any new or groundbreaking information?
Ghislaine Maxwell says Trump was a gentleman in all respects. Will that put an end to the MAGA rage on Epstein?
And the redistricting war heats up while California Governor Gavin Newsom trolls Trump. But first,
President Trump wants to ban mail-in voting in America and scrap electronic voting machines while he's at it.
We're going to end mail-in voting. It's a fraud.
Why?
Vladimir Putin, smart guy, said you can't have an honest election with mail-in voting. And he said there's not a country in the world that uses it now.
Not such a smart guy, as it turns out. While many countries do not allow mail-in voting, most of the world's leading democracies do, including Australia, Canada, France, Greece, India, Japan, New Zealand, the UK and the United States of America, at least for now.
and also one other relevant country uses mail-in voting, according to Russia expert and ex-foreign affairs advisor for Trump, Fiona Hill.
And President Trump asserted in his Fox News interview that there are no countries in the world that allow mail-in voting. Well, Russia allows mail-in voting. And if everybody wants to go out and look, they can look for themselves. In 2020, President Vladimir Putin signed into law Russians being able to vote by mail and also on the internet.
By the way, internet voting is far more suspect than mail-in voting is, so I think Putin might be having a lend of Trump there.
Yeah, maybe. So, we can say for sure Putin is wrong and Trump is wrong. But, of course, that's not going to stop him trying to upend America's voting system, because the Russian leader is also telling him exactly what he wants to hear, including Trump's false claim that he won the 2020 election.
And he said, you won that election by so much. And that's how he got it. He said, and if you would have won, we wouldn't have had a war. You'd have all these millions of people alive now instead of dead. And he said, and you lost it because of mail-in voting. It was a rigged election.
So, mail-in voting killed all those Ukrainians. Of course, Trump has been making similar baseless claims for years, even when he wins.
The election is being rigged by corrupt media. It's a rigged election. It's the only way we're going to lose.
And now they're trying to do the same thing all over again by rigging the most important election in the history of our country, the 2024 election.
There is, of course, no evidence of widespread voter fraud in US elections. In fact, a report commissioned by Trump's own campaign after his 2020 loss did not back up his claims of fraud. And Trump has also been making this claim.
Even Jimmy Carter with this commission, they set it up. He said the one thing about mail-in voting, you will never have an honest election if you have mail-in. Jimmy Carter, good guy. You know, he's a good man. And the conclusion was you can't have mail-in voting.
It's good that Jimmy Carter's suddenly a good man, but the rest was garbage. Carter and former Republican Secretary of State James Baker headed a 2005 commission examining US elections. That was in the aftermath of the disputed 2000 Bush-Gore election in Florida and concerns over voting machines in Ohio in 2004. And while their final report did raise concerns about privacy when it came to mail-in voting and notes it increases the risk of fraud, it does not say it should not be allowed. Rather, that better precautions are needed to ensure the return of ballots is not intercepted, and its formal recommendation is simply for further research of the pros and cons of vote by mail and early voting. The Commission certainly did not say you cannot have mail-in voting, as President Trump claims. In fact, Baker's advisor John Williams, who also worked on that commission, told Newsweek this week that such a notion goes against President Carter's thoughts about mail-in voting. A spokeswoman for the Carter Center said the former president's position on mail-in voting was, quote, very positive. It is bunk, Jazz.
Well, there's also two other problems for Trump when it comes to banning mail-in voting, John. Number one, he can't do it. According to the Constitution, the time, place and manner of holding elections in each state shall be decided by state legislatures, but Congress can make or alter such regulations. So actually, everyone has some say about mail-in voting except for the president. And Trump should know that by now, because two courts have already blocked Trump's executive order from the last time he tried to control elections. That's Trump's first problem. His second problem is even if Trump could ban mail-in voting. It's not in his interest to do so. Republican groups spent millions of dollars in the last cycle on ads and invested in a massive door-knocking campaign to convince Republicans to vote early and through the mail. And guess what? It worked. In swing states like North Carolina and Arizona, Republicans actually won more mail-in votes than the Democrats did in 2024. And those gains could easily be built upon in the future because the MAGA movement has way more low-propensity, unreliable voters than Republicans used to have. And it's those voters in particular who are more likely to vote when it's made more convenient for them through mail-in voting. Furthermore, Republican voters are disproportionately rural. So it's obviously in Republicans' interest to make it easier for people in far-flung rural areas to vote by mail, rather than making them travel long distances in uncertain weather to vote. So, John, Republicans would be tearing their hair out about Trump discouraging mail-in voting. What's he doing?
I'm surprised they have any hair left at this stage, Jazz. For more on all this, I spoke to the Secretary of State for Minnesota, Steve Simons. He's a Democrat who's vowed to fight any attempts by the Trump administration to ban voting by mail and voting machines. Mr. Secretary, welcome to Planet America. So, President Trump says Vladimir Putin told him you can't have an honest election with mail-in voting, so President Trump wants to get rid of mail-in voting. What do you say to that?
Well, first, I'm not sure Vladimir Putin is the best authority on free, fair, and honest elections. Secondly, mail-in voting in this country, and particularly in my state of Minnesota, is very, very popular. It's been embraced by millions upon millions of people. In Minnesota, we had nearly 40% in the last presidential election vote that way. For the obvious reasons. It's a matter of convenience. It's a matter of flexibility. People here, at least, increasingly don't want to be told that the only way they can vote is on one particular day, in one particular physical place, during a particular set of hours. They like the freedom and flexibility of voting from their kitchen table. And we have had mail-in voting in Minnesota since the 1860s. And then more broadly for a century, in about the 1920s. So it's a longstanding practice. It is very, very popular. And it is really particularly secure as well. So it's disappointing to see the president issue this sort of call to action. We hope it stays in just a social media post and that doesn't ripen into something else like an executive order, but we'll be ready if it does.
So what power does the president have over the conduct of federal elections, whether it's mail-in voting or voting machines, which he also wants to get rid of?
He has very little power. And we found this out earlier this year when he issued another executive order on elections, and my state of Minnesota joined 18 others in striking down part of that executive order. Our Constitution is very clear that the states in the United States, the 50 states, are in charge of the time, place, and manner of elections. Our Congress may also step in, but our Constitution says nothing about a president of the United States, either this president or any president, having the ability to simply wave a magic wand, so to speak, in the Oval Office, in the White House, and decree a wholesale change in election practices in the states. So we're quite confident, even with an executive order, that we'll be able once again to win in court and pare back a large part of it, maybe all of it, depending on what he says. You mentioned elections equipment. Here, I think the president misunderstands, to put it charitably. He frames this in terms of electronic voting equipment or paper ballots, but that's not the way the system works. In Minnesota and almost every place in America, it's both. Everyone votes on pen and paper. They vote on actual paper that you can touch and feel and see. Those ballots are fed into tabulating machines, but it's not either or, it's both. And those machines, by the way, are do the job more quickly, less expensively, and more accurately than actual hand counts. So there's no reason, there's no common sense reason we would get rid of tabulating equipment. And we already have paper ballots in this country.
Even if President Trump hasn't got the power legally to do things, he's certainly not above using the power of the federal purse strings, withholding federal funding until he gets his way. Is that a possibility in this case?
Yes, there is the possibility, the threat, the prospect that he and his administration will withhold federal funds if states don't comply with certain of his policy preferences. It may or may not be tabulating machines. It may or it may not be the use of mail voting. That would be unfortunate. It would make our election system less secure. We rely on federal funds in part for things like election security, cybersecurity, physical security. I don't think they can claw back any of the money that they've already given to us, which is substantial. But in the future, it's possible that they could seek to condition those payments on us or any other state complying with the president's preferences. And that will be a real crisis if that comes to pass.
And what else are you expecting in the run-up to the 2026 midterm elections and beyond when it comes to President Trump and his allies tinkering with the electoral system? Are there other battlefields that you're preparing for, maybe voter ID or something else?
I think of it as I zoom out a little bit and think of it as broader than that. It's not so much about specific tactics, although it is about that. I think it's about generally, unfortunately, what we're seeing, creating an impression of elections as somehow untrustworthy. And in our country, the opposite is true. And we know this from the 2020 election, where the president who lost that election tried through dozens of lawsuits to get it overturned in whole or in part and failed almost 100% of the time. The courts looked at the evidence, they looked at the facts, and determined that no, there was no wrongdoing sufficient to overturn the result of an election. But that attitude has persisted, and this idea that the 2020 election or other elections have been rigged or fixed or stolen does persist in some corners politically. And my worry is, it's not a prediction necessarily, but it is a worry that all the things that we've been discussing will create a climate of supercharged cynicism and skepticism, and will at least set up the opportunity to question the results of an election that might not go the way that certain people want, and that what we're talking about now will sort of set the stage or lay the groundwork for that kind of discussion.
Secretary Simon, thank you very much for joining us on Planet America.
Thanks for having me.
The United States Justice Department has released transcripts of 2 interviews conducted by Deputy Attorney General and former Trump lawyer Todd Blanche with convicted sex criminal Ghislaine Maxwell. Maxwell is serving 20 years in prison for sex trafficking and the sexual abuse of underage girls and young women in cahoots with her former boyfriend, the late financier Jeffrey Epstein. Trump and Epstein were, of course, photographed together many times in the 1990s. Trump says he ended their friendship after Epstein stole people who worked for him, including teenage girls. Todd Blanche asked Maxwell about Trump's relationship with Epstein and herself.
President Trump was always very cordial and very kind to me, and I just want to say that I admire his extraordinary achievement in becoming the president now, and I like him, and I've always liked him.
Oh, nice. But did she ever observe Trump receiving one of those massages?
Never.
And Maxwell continued,
I never witnessed the president in any inappropriate setting in any way. The president was never inappropriate with anybody. In the times that I was with him, he was a gentleman in all respects.
And as for the question that the MAGA mob want to know, did Jeffrey Epstein keep a client list of the men who did have sex with underage girls that he and Maxwell groomed and trafficked?
There is no list.
Now, perhaps not entirely coincidentally, Chaz, since that interview, Ghislaine Maxwell has been moved to a lower security prison camp. President Trump, meanwhile, has not ruled out issuing her with a pardon or a commutation of her sentence.
Note, by the way, that no offender convicted of a sex offence is allowed to be housed in a minimum security camp like Maxwell's been moved to, unless the public safety factor has been waived. But such a waiver would be extraordinarily unusual. In fact, multiple prison officials say they've never seen anything like it before. But don't be suspicious, because Trump swears that he didn't know anything about these privileges, and they're all very standard stuff anyway.
Were you aware of, and did you personally approve the prison transfer for Ghislaine Maxwell that your Justice Department...
I didn't know about it at all, no. I read about it just like you did.
And do you believe that she is...
It's not a very uncommon thing.
You see, John, I think it is a very uncommon thing. I think it's especially an uncommon thing for Maxwell's custody level to be set at out, because that means this convicted sex offender is allowed to leave her minimum security camp for work assignments. Needless to say, that would also require a waiver and would also be very unusual. Most noteworthy of all is that according to Maxwell's ex-prison mate, Maxwell originally hoped to receive a pardon from Biden in exchange for information about Trump in the lead up to the 2024 election. Her ex-prison mate says, "I heard her tell another inmate that she had dirt on Trump and that it was going to get her a pardon from Biden." So that all seems quite noteworthy to me. And it suggests to me that Maxwell's testimony might not be 100% truthful. Also suggesting that is that Maxwell has already been caught out in a porky, saying that she didn't think Trump had ever visited Epstein's house. But there was a report from New York Magazine in 2003 of a dinner at Epstein's house organised by Ghislaine Maxwell that had as one of its guests, you guessed it, Donald Trump. So I guess that's why Maxwell keeps using the phrase "I believe" about 6 trillion times during that interview. The question, though, is why is the Justice Department releasing interviews with a proven perjurer rather than all the actual Justice Department documents from Epstein's case file that was subpoenaed by the House Oversight Committee? To be fair, the Department of Justice has released one trove of documents to the committee so far. We don't know how many other troves they will yet release, but it is noteworthy that the Justice Department are dragging their feet just a little bit. Last week, when their final application to unseal Epstein grand jury transcripts was rejected by the courts, the judge actually got quite annoyed about all the obfuscation. Judge Richard Berman said the government's 100,000 pages of Epstein files and materials dwarfed the 70-odd pages of grand jury materials, and in fact, he explicitly suggested the grand jury unsealing motion looked like a diversion from releasing the Epstein files. Talking about judges, though, we should note that the president did have some good news in court last week with regards to his $500 million fine for corporate fraud. The fine was originally actually $355 million for dishonestly padding his financial statements to lenders, but with interest and additional penalties, that added up to $527 million. And the judges vacated that fine completely, with 2 of them saying, while harm certainly occurred, it was not the cataclysmic harm that can justify a nearly $500 million award to the state. And they said the penalty was an excessive fine that violates the 8th Amendment of the Constitution. And I should say that both those judges were appointed by Democrats. I should also note that the panel of 5 did uphold the finding that Trump has engaged in fraud. It's just that 2 of the other judges felt that while the lawsuit was justifiable, the fine was simply excessive. Now, I tell you all that, John, because you'd never know it from Trump's reaction on social media, which was that he'd been handed total victory and that the vote was 5-0 in his favour and that everything he did was absolutely correct and even perfect. My God, John, he's such a shameless liar. It's so brazen.
I believe you might be right about that. Texas Democrats who fled interstate 3 weeks ago to protest the redrawing of House districts and give Republicans as many as 5 extra seats in Washington are finally back at work. The fugitive lawmakers were even given police escorts to make sure they didn't run off again. If they didn't agree to the guard, they couldn't go home.
This Texas lawmaker is waking up locked inside the state capitol. She's been there since Monday afternoon because she refused to sign a permission slip for a law enforcement escort home.
As you can see, it's empty in here.
But it didn't stay empty for long. Republicans had the quorum they needed to gavel in the special session of the State Assembly and pass the electoral maps, which even Republicans admit are a gerrymander.
88 ayes and 52 nays. House Bill 4 is finally passed.
And Democrats say this redistricting is all about helping Trump to hold on to his slim House majority.
It is clearly and deliberately manufactures 5 more Republican seats in Congress because Trump himself knows the voters are rejecting his agenda.
Forget the Democrats. The guy who drew the maps said exactly the same thing. He said, I drew it based on what would better perform for Republican candidates. So that's pretty definitive.
Yeah, being shameless, it seems, is a little contagious. While partisan redistricting or even full-on gerrymandering is not illegal in and of itself. It can be if it is designed to disenfranchise certain racial groups in breach of the Voting Rights Act of the 1960s. Democrats say it does. Republicans disagree.
Following the Voting Rights Act, we will follow the Voting Rights Act. I told you that the council that we relied on followed it, and I asked them to. It's unnecessary.
It is a clear violation of the Voting Rights Act and the Constitution.
We'll see about that. Meanwhile, Democrats are fighting fire with fire in California, passing a bill to enable a vote on their own gerrymandered boundaries there in November, which they hope will give them back the 5 seats that they could be about to lose in Texas.
Yeah, and it does look like that special election vote in California is going to be happening, John. Republicans did challenge that vote in court, but California Supreme Court rejected that challenge on Thursday. Of course, this will not end there, though, as I keep on saying on this show. New York Governor Kathy Hochul responded to the Texas vote with a simple game on. And on the other side, both White House officials and a mysterious third-party group have been pressuring Republicans in Indiana to gerrymander their boundaries as well. I think the harmonious, loving vibe going on has been best expressed by Newsom himself, who the other day explained that
we're fighting fire with fire, and we're going to punch these sons of bitches in the mouth.
So I'm sure, John, this will end up being a wonderful monument for democracy.
Yeah, I'm sure you're wrong. Speaking of fighting fire with fire, though, Chaz, California Governor Newsom has a press office that is getting a lot of attention at the moment, basically just trolling Donald Trump with very Trump-like insults.
Tiny Hands is out here copying me, but without the stamina. Sad. And certainly without the looks.
And they're also imitating those sycophantic memes about the president, replacing Jesus looking over Trump's shoulder with Hulk Hogan in angel wings. Other Democrats are getting in on this gag as well, with Trumpy Newsom memes of their own. What a honey. Reporters following the governor want to know what this is all about, and he tries to make a serious point.
I hope it's a wake-up call to the President of the United States. I'm sort of following his example. If you've got issues with what I'm putting out, you sure as hell should have concerns about what he's putting out as president. So to the extent it's gotten some attention, I'm pleased.
And it sure is getting lots of attention, especially from Trump's favourite Fox News. Dana Perino, the former press secretary to President George W. Bush, has this advice for Gavin Newsom.
Stop it with the Twitter thing. I don't know where his wife is. If I were his wife, I would say, "What? You are making a fool of yourself. Stop it. Do not let your staff tweet. And if you're doing it yourself, put the phone away and start over."
Advice not taken, because Newsom's press office slapped back straight away with another Trumpy tweet.
Dana Ding Dong Perino, never heard of her until today, is melting down because of me, Gavin C. Newsom. Fox hates that I'm America's most favorite governor. Ratings king, saving America.
And even the Vice President of the United States, J.D. Vance, has been giving Newsom some advice on this.
I mean, this idea that Gavin Newsom is somehow going to mimic Donald Trump's style, I think that ignores the fundamental genius of President Trump's political success, which is that he's authentic. He just is who he is. You've got to be yourself. You've actually got to talk to people honestly about the issues. I don't think it's that complicated. Don't be a crazy person. Be authentic. If the Democrats did that, they'd do a hell of a lot better.
Fundamental genius.
He is who he is.
I think he needs a parody. I gotta say, I think some of these are authentically funny. Like Newsom's parody of Trump's Taylor Swift tweet.
Has anyone noticed that since I said I hate Kid Rock, he's no longer hot? GCN.
And his mockery of Trump's obsession with the Nobel Peace Prize.
Wow, an honor. Thank you, GCN.
And his merchandise range is pretty funny as well.
Many people are saying this is the greatest merchandise ever made.
It's also all clearly getting under the White House's skin. Deputy Press Secretary Abigail Jackson could barely contain her irritation, writing, "The all-caps tweets from Newsom's team are very weird and not at all funny, but I know some dweeb is sitting in they-them's office cackling to themselves, thinking they're a world-class comedian." Maybe so, but I reckon the tweets are doing the job.
That account, get this, up 450% in terms of the number of followers since mid-June. What about those Google searches for him? Get this, daily Google searches for Gavin Newsom, up like a rocket. What are we talking about? Since June 1, up 1,300%. Compared to August 1st, look at that, up 500%. So the bottom line is, In politics, especially if you're thinking of entering in 2028, it's all about generating attention, and so far Gavin Newsom has done a good job at generating attention.
I'm sure this will wear thin soon, John. But in the meantime, we've always got this, whatever this is. But now to the original tweeter. Earlier this year, Trump approved a massive merger between US Steel and Japanese company Nippon Steel, but only on one condition. They gave the US government veto power over their corporate governance decisions. This was highly unusual, but it got more unusual last month when Trump agreed to ignore a security hold from his own administration and let chipmaker Nvidia sell its H20 chips to China, but only if they gave the US government a 15% slice of their chip sales. Now, some people are calling this state capitalism and comparing it to the kind of hijinks that occur in China and Russia. And now there's yet one more example of this kind of thing. Melina Wicks has the details.
Lately, Trump has been getting really into chips.
I'm going to give a really big one.
No, the other kind.
The roller coaster year continues for chipmaker Intel. The administration is now considering using CHIPS Act funding approved by the Biden administration in 2022 to take a stake in the company.
The CHIPS Act was meant to encourage manufacturing of semiconductors on U.S. soil. American company Intel was poised to be the biggest beneficiary, with $7.9 billion in grants and up to $11 billion in loans. In its heyday, Intel was a cutting-edge computer chip company. But over the past 2 decades, they've fallen behind, repeatedly failing to partner with emerging technologies like iPhones and OpenAI when they had the chance. That's got a sting. Intel is worse at picking partners than a contestant on The Bachelor. A large chunk of Intel's CHIPS Act money was for a new factory in Ohio. It hasn't been going well.
The tech company announced it will slow the pace of construction in Ohio, and if it cannot find a buyer for its 14A technology, which is used to make semiconductors, it may have to halt construction entirely.
Intel is slowing construction because they're not sure anyone wants to buy the tech they plan to build there. There's speculation they might give up chip making altogether. But that assumes the government would let them. Taiwanese company TSMC fabricates around 90% of the world's most advanced semiconductors. And the US is worried China could invade Taiwan. I can't imagine why. But if that happened, China could cut off access to the chips America needs for both consumers and defense, including all modern precision weapons, planes, ships, tanks, drones, as well as AI. Trump used to argue that the CHIPS Act was not the answer. And you'll never guess what the answer is.
Your CHIPS Act is a horrible, horrible thing. We give hundreds of billions of dollars, and it doesn't mean a thing. All that was important to them was they didn't want to pay the tariffs.
It's tariffs. It's always tariffs. If you guessed right, you can text President Trump to tell him about it. But instead of repealing the CHIPS Act through Congress, Trump has decided to get the money back a different way, by seeking equity in the companies that receive funding from the program. It's led to some confusing messaging from his Commerce Secretary, Howard Lutnick.
For national security, we need to make our own chips here. You can't have 99% of leading-edge chips made in Taiwan. We want to make them here. Look, the CHIPS Act was just a giveaway to rich companies. I mean, why would we give them money to come to America?
Because of that thing you just said. The point of the CHIPS Act was to make more semiconductors in the US, because the technology is essential for economic development and national defense. And while a bunch of new factories are being built, it's not going to be a quick fix, especially when it's not even clear America can get the workers to staff them. But if silicone chips don't work out, there's always the traditional kind.
Grab one while it's really hot.
In the hot temperatures down here, when something is painted black, it gets even warmer. And it will make it even harder for people to climb. So we are going to be painting the entire southern border wall black.
Anti-immigrant wall paint, just $500 million.
Kristi's warehouse.
Killing her own dog was just the beginning.
And that is it for another trip to Planet America. We'll be back at the same time next Monday night, 9:35 p.m, right here on ABC TV.
And do not forget the weekend edition on ABC News Friday at 8 p.m, and both shows are on ABC iView, YouTube and Facebook. See you. Bye-bye.